Hello, my name is Olga Pilkington. I am a linguist and an instructor of composition at Dixie State University in the United States. My most recent research involves a written popularization of science, and today I will share with you a few techniques that can help any scientist produce an engaging popular science text. These techniques are already employed by such successful popularizers as Brian Greene, Michio Kaku, Marcus du Sautoy, Bill Bryson, and we'll see what's their secret, what we can borrow from them to make our own popular science engaging texts. In today's world, it's really important for scientists to be successful not only in the laboratory, but also to be able to communicate their findings to the outside world, to non-specialists. And being proficient in writing popular science is really what does the trick. A lot of funding usually depends on how well scientists communicate with non-specialists, so this is why I suggest popularizing skill sets should be part of science and science education curriculum. And now let's look at the three techniques that I mentioned in the introduction. They are the use of narrative, or constructing a story, using scientists as characters within the story, and using fictionality. So let's look at each one of them in detail. How do you create a good popular science story? Well, here are some steps, and they are adapted from the research of William Labov, who analyzed narratives of personal experience. But my own research suggests that these steps also apply to popular science. And they are the abstract. Here you may use a very brief summary of the narrative to come. The orientation. Here you introduce your characters, the places, and for popular science narratives, sometimes the equipment used in the research. Complication. This is your main action, what happens in the story. Evaluation, explanation, the next two steps are crucial to popular science narratives. Evaluation lets you show why your research or the research you're talking about, why is it important, how can it impact the lives of non-experts and non-specialists. The explanation is the portion of the narrative that allows you to explain specific scientific concepts relevant to your research. The result is the outcome of your research, and the coda is a transitional element that is used to transition either from one narrative to another or from a narrative to something else that you might be doing. So let's look at an example here. This is an example from popular author Marcus du Sautoy, and he tells us the story of Galileo and the pendulum. You will notice here that pretty much all the elements that we've talked about before are present. However, not all of them have to be, or not all of them have to be very pronounced. Notice the abstract is actually the title of a narrative here. Also notice how the explanation section interrupts the result. The result is split in two. So you can play around with the order of the elements, but it's good if most of them are present. Especially, you cannot do without a complication, and you cannot do without a result, without explanation, nor without evaluation. So make sure you include those. Now, let's look at some other ways to approach writing a narrative. Here are three popular types of complications or types of narrative action that are used in popular science, and these are from research of Michael Howie. They are gap in knowledge. This kind of story starts out by saying that scientists, or you yourself, if you're talking about your own research, did not know something, and by the end of the story achieved that knowledge. Problem solution starts out with a problem. Throughout the story, the scientists search for the solution, and at the end of the story they find it. Goal achievement. A goal is set, and by the end of the story it is achieved. By the way, that Galileo and the pendulum narrative is the goal achievement story. Galileo sets out to find out what happens to the pendulum. He sets a goal to time it, and at the end of the story, the achievement is his discovery. Now, you might be surprised that I told you that scientists in popular science narratives have to be characters. So how do you do that? The best and the easiest way is to use presented discourse of scientists. That means introducing the speech and thought of scientists. And you can use that to create explanations, make scientists into relatable characters, or what's very important, present discoveries not as just scientific facts, but as intimate insights, and you can achieve that through presentation of thought. So let's look at some examples. Here's how you can use presented speech to incorporate explanations. So it's not the narrator, not the author of the story who explains the scientific concepts, but the scientists themselves. Notice in the first example here, there's also a very interesting poetic image here. And it's attributed to the authors of the paper that Brian Greene is talking about, to the scientists, not to Brian Greene himself. The same happens here in the second example. The scientist is the one who is shown as the one introducing this beautiful imagery to us and presenting an explanation, not the author himself. If you feel like you would like to include the words of a scientist verbatim, you can use a quote. And here is an example from Bill Bryson on how to do that, where the explanation is contained within the exact words of a scientist. Now, with quotes, this is probably the most popular way of incorporating voices of other people into texts or using presented discourse. When it comes to popular science, whenever you quote scientists, you don't always have to quote them necessarily on the subject of profound scientific matters or discoveries. Look at these quotes. These are quite emotional, and they actually show scientists as reacting to what's happening as part of research, not necessarily being engaged in explaining or in conducting experiments. So these show scientists as human, as people who are emotional. And that's important. That's how you create this relationship between the reader and the scientist. Now, discoveries as intimate insights. Here it's important to use thought presentation to introduce discoveries. So don't just say, and at the end he discovered or she discovered this and this. Introduce your discovery as a thought process of a scientist. Here's a wonderful example from Ferris. You have the first portion of an example where the narrator explains what's going on, kind of sets the scene. And this is not the whole narrative, this is a portion of it. And then this verb right here, occurred, shows us that what follows is the thought process of the scientist. Another popular verb to use is to realize. He realized that something happened and led to the discovery. So make sure you incorporate that into your narrative. This way a discovery comes out as a result of a thought process, not just the series of steps that a person took. Now, I also mentioned at the beginning of the presentation fictionality. Well, what is that? When it comes to science, some of you may be surprised that science is actually very much related to fiction. When we talk about thought experiments or modeling, those are examples of fictionality that real scientists use. Now, when it comes to written popularization, fictionality can be employed to create a reader as a character in your popular science story. So before we've talked about how to incorporate scientists as characters. Now, you can use presented discourse, and all these are types of presented discourse. And if you're going to introduce this to students, they would need a little bit of an introduction of what each type of presented discourse is, and these are not complete. Direct speech, narrator's presentation of speech act, free direct thought, and narrator's presentation of thought act. So once you know what those are, it would be easy to incorporate them to make reader into a character. So you can have your reader talk within a text. You can have him or her converse with scientists. You can have him converse with you, the narrator. This makes the reader appear not only outside the story, but also inside it, be a character. So in conclusion, I would like to give you a brief summary. So if you use narrative to create your popular science, that's the best way to go. Human brain is actually wired to process narrative a lot better than any other type of information. So always structure your text as a story and use the steps that I suggested. Also, make sure that your scientists are not just figureheads inside your story, but actual functioning characters. Use their speech, use their thought to introduce important moments in the development of your story. And don't forget about your reader. Make sure that your reader is also incorporated inside the story. And here is where you use fictionality. You imagine how the reader would react. You give him or her some words. Give your reader things to think about and put it on paper. So, I hope that you found this helpful. There is actually a real need for popularizing skill set for our future scientists, and I really hope that something of this nature will become part of science education curriculum. Thank you very much.